Baby found. Two chained German shepherds buried alive in mud. What baby did next. Left everyone in tears. The story you're about to listen will break your heart and then mend it in ways you never imagined possible. What this silent little boy did when he discovered something tragic in the mud will leave you speechless. Don't forget to like, share, and comment where you're watching from. Rain lashed against the windows of the small cottage at the edge of Willow Creek. Inside, Sophie Morgan gently brushed her son's hair away from his forehead as he pressed his face against the glass, watching the storm intensify. 5-year-old Noah hadn't spoken a single word in almost 8 months. Not since that terrible day when he'd watched his father's truck skid off the bridge during a flash flood. The doctors called it selective mutism, trauma-induced. Sophie called it heartbreak. "It's really coming down out there, isn't it?" she said softly, not expecting an answer. Noah simply pressed his small palm against the window, tracing the path of a raindrop with his finger. His eyes, deep brown like his father's, followed the swaying branches of the old oak tree in their yard. Sophie sighed and glanced at the clock. She needed to finish arranging the new shipment of lilies for tomorrow's display at Petals and Blooms, the flower shop where she'd worked since moving to Willow Creek 3 years ago. Before Noah's father, Daniel, had died. Before their world had shattered into a million tiny, irreparable pieces. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need me, sweetheart," she whispered, kissing the top of his head. Noah nodded slightly, his way of acknowledging her, but didn't turn around. These small gestures were how they communicated now. A nod, a point. Sometimes a drawing left on the kitchen table. Sophie had learned to read her son's silence like a language all its own. The cottage was small but cozy, with mismatched furniture and photos covering almost every surface. Daniel smiled from frames throughout the house, his presence still filling the spaces he had left behind. Sophie picked up a stack of bills from the counter and tucked them into a drawer. She'd deal with those tomorrow. Tonight, she just needed to get through arranging these flowers and maybe, just maybe, convince Noah to eat more than 3 bites of dinner. Outside, the wind howled, bending trees and rattling windows. Their cottage sat at the edge of Willow Creek, a small village where everybody knew everybody's business, where casseroles appeared on doorsteps during hard times, and where Sophie had found unexpected support after Daniel's death. Mrs. Peterson from next door watched Noah after school. The owner of the flower shop, Elizabeth, had given Sophie flexible hours. Even grumpy old Jenkins down the street had silently cleared their driveway after the last snowstorm. But none of them could reach Noah. Not even Sophie could break through the wall her son had built around himself. The sound of the kitchen timer pulled Sophie from her thoughts. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to check on the chicken soup simmering on the stove. "Noah, dinner in 10 minutes, okay?" she called out, stirring the pot gently. When no pattering of feet followed her announcement, Sophie wasn't surprised. Noah often got lost in his own world, especially during storms. He had always been fascinated by thunder and lightning, even as a baby. Daniel used to hold him up to the window during storms, narrating the weather like a sportscaster, making Sophie laugh until her sides hurt. "Noah," she called again, a bit louder this time. Still nothing. Sophie put down the ladle and walked back to the living room. The window seat where Noah had been perched was empty. Noah? A twinge of worry pricked at her chest. She glanced around the small room, then checked his bedroom. Empty. "Noah, this isn't funny. Where are you, sweetheart?" The silence that answered her sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the draft seeping through the old windows. Sophie checked the bathroom, under the beds, in the closets, behind the couch. With each empty space, her heart beat faster. Noah would sometimes hide, but he always came out when she used her serious voice. "Noah!" Her voice echoed through the empty house. Thunder cracked outside, so loud it made the windows rattle. Sophie's eyes darted to the front door, and her heart stopped. It was slightly ajar, rainwater pooling on the welcome mat beneath it. "No, no, no," she whispered, rushing to the door and flinging it open. Rain immediately soaked her hair and clothes as she stepped onto the porch, eyes scanning the yard frantically. "Noah!" she screamed over the howling wind. Lightning flashed, illuminating the empty swing set, the garden shed, the path leading down to the main road. No sign of her little boy. Sophie ran back inside, grabbed her phone and raincoat, and shoved her feet into rubber boots. Her fingers trembled as she dialed Elizabeth's number. "Hello?" Elizabeth's warm voice answered. "It's Noah. He's gone." The door was open. Sophie couldn't string together a coherent sentence as she pulled on her raincoat. "Sophie, slow down. What's happened?" "Noah's missing. He must have gone outside during the storm. I need help finding him." Tears mixed with raindrops on her cheeks as she grabbed a flashlight from the drawer. "I'm calling Sheriff Davis right now. Stay on the line. Where do you think he might have gone?" Sophie stepped back onto the porch, shining her flashlight into the darkness. "I don't know. He wanders sometimes, but he always comes back quickly. He's never gone out during a storm before." Lightning split the sky again, and in its brief, harsh light, Sophie spotted something that made her blood run cold. Small footprints in the mud, leading away from the house, toward the old forest that bordered their property. "The woods," she whispered. "I think he went into the woods." "Don't go alone, Sophie. Wait for backup." But Sophie had already hung up, shoving the phone into her pocket as she sprinted across the yard, following the tiny footprints that were quickly filling with rainwater. The Willow Creek forest was ancient and dense, with massive trees whose canopies created a labyrinth of shadows even in daylight. Now, in the storm, it was a nightmare landscape of thrashing branches and impenetrable darkness, broken only by flashes of lightning and the beam of Sophie's flashlight. "Noah!" she screamed, her voice lost in the roar of the storm. The rain was coming down in sheets now, making it almost impossible to follow the footprints. Sophie dropped to her knees, desperately searching for any sign of which way her son had gone. A faint impression in the mud, a child-sized shoe print, pointed deeper into the woods, toward the old apple orchard that had been abandoned decades ago. Sophie's heart hammered in her chest as she forced herself to her feet and pushed forward, branches whipping her face, mud sucking at her boots. "Please, please, please," she whispered, a prayer to whoever might be listening. "Please let him be okay." The orchard appeared before her, twisted, gnarled apple trees standing like sentinels in the storm. Sophie paused, sweeping her flashlight in a wide arc. "Noah!" she called again, voice cracking with desperation. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, Sophie thought she saw movement near the ravine that cut through the eastern edge of the orchard, a place locals called Devil's Gully because of how quickly it flooded during storms. Exactly like the storm raging now. Terror gave her new strength as she ran toward the ravine, slipping and sliding on the muddy ground. "Noah, answer me!" The sound reached her between thunderclaps, so faint she almost missed it. Not a child's voice, but a bark. Weak, distressed, but unmistakable. Sophie reached the edge of the ravine and pointed her flashlight down. The beam caught something that made her gasp, a small, mud-covered figure halfway down the steep slope, on his knees, digging frantically at something in the ground. "Noah!" Sophie didn't hesitate. She scrambled down the slippery incline, nearly falling several times before reaching her son. "Noah! Oh my God!" She grabbed his shoulders, spinning him to face her. His clothes were soaked, his face and hands coated in mud, his eyes wide with urgency and something else, a fierce determination she hadn't seen since before Daniel died. Noah struggled against her grip, trying to turn back to whatever he'd been digging at. Sophie's flashlight beam swung with the movement, illuminating what had captured her son's attention so completely. A patch of mud was shifting, as if something beneath it was trying to break free. Another weak bark emanated from it, and Sophie's flashlight caught the gleam of something metal, a chain, partially buried, leading from the moving mud to another mound a few feet away. "What in the world?" she whispered, dropping to her knees beside Noah. Lightning flashed again, and in its brilliant light, Sophie saw it clearly. A dog's muzzle emerging from the mud, gasping for air. Then another flash revealed a second mound, also moving slightly, connected to the first by a heavy chain. Noah's hands were bleeding from digging, his fingernails torn, but he hadn't stopped. He clawed at the mud surrounding the first dog's head with single-minded focus. "Oh my God," Sophie breathed, the horror of the situation washing over her. Someone had buried 2 dogs alive in the ravine, leaving just enough of their muzzles exposed for them to breathe, at least until the rain came and the mud began to rise. Without hesitation, Sophie joined her son, using her hands to scoop away the heavy, waterlogged soil. The first dog's head emerged further, a German shepherd with matted, mud-caked fur. Its eyes rolled toward them, filled with terror and exhaustion. "It's okay," Sophie said automatically, though nothing about this was okay. "We're going to get you out." The rain continued to pour, washing mud back into the holes almost as quickly as they could dig. The ravine was starting to fill with water, a small stream already forming along its bottom, threatening to rise and drown the trapped animals within minutes. "We need to hurry," Sophie said, more to herself than to Noah. She handed him the flashlight. "Hold this steady for me, sweetheart." Noah did as she asked, his small hands trembling but determined. Sophie dug more frantically now, uncovering more of the first dog, its neck, then shoulders, revealing a thick metal collar connected to the chain. The second dog was barely moving now, its muzzle occasionally disappearing under the rising muddy water. Sophie redoubled her efforts on the second animal, while Noah continued to free the first. The chain connecting them was heavy and industrial, the kind used for towing vehicles, not restraining pets. This was deliberate, methodical, evil. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, they had uncovered enough of both dogs to see they were indeed German shepherds. One male, one female, both severely malnourished with ribs visible even through their mud-caked fur. The female's leg was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. The male had a gash across his muzzle that looked fresh and deliberate. A wave of nausea hit Sophie as the reality of what they'd stumbled upon sank in. Someone had done this on purpose. They'd brought these dogs out here, chained them together, hurt them, and buried them alive to die slowly as the storm washed mud into their airways. "We need to get them out of here completely," Sophie said, looking around for something, anything that might help them. The chain was secured by a heavy padlock. She couldn't break it, and they couldn't carry the dogs out separately while they remained connected. Noah tugged at her sleeve, then pointed urgently up the ravine. Sophie followed his gesture and saw headlights in the distance, cutting through the rain. "Hello!" she screamed, waving her arms frantically. "Help! We need help down here!" The headlights swung toward them, momentarily blinding Sophie. She shielded her eyes, relief washing over her. Someone had come looking for them. Sheriff Davis, probably, or one of the search party Elizabeth would have organized. But as the vehicle drew closer, something felt wrong. It moved too slowly, deliberately, like it was stalking rather than searching. The headlights went dark suddenly, plunging them back into the storm's darkness. "Hello," Sophie called again, uncertainty creeping into her voice. Noah tugged at her sleeve again, harder this time. When she looked down, she saw naked fear in his eyes, not the frantic worry of before, but a new instinctive terror. He shook his head violently. "What is it?" Sophie whispered, pulling him closer. The male German shepherd, though still partially trapped in mud, had raised his head. His ears were forward, body tense despite his weakened state. A low growl rumbled from his throat, not directed at Sophie and Noah, but at whatever lurked at the top of the ravine. Sophie's instincts screamed danger. She clicked off the flashlight, plunging them into darkness, and pulled Noah against her. "Don't make a sound," she whispered into his ear, though she knew he wouldn't anyway. For a long, terrible moment, they crouched in the rising water and mud, listening to the storm rage around them and the labored breathing of the two dogs. Then, almost lost in the sound of rain, came the click of a car door opening. Footsteps. Another click as the door closed. Sophie held her breath, straining to see through the darkness. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, she glimpsed a figure at the top of the ravine, tall, wearing dark clothing, standing perfectly still, looking in their direction. Then, darkness again. The female German shepherd whimpered softly, struggling weakly against the chain. The male's growl deepened, though he could barely lift his head now. Noah's fingers dug into Sophie's arm, and when she looked down, she could just make out his face in the darkness. He pointed first at the dogs, then at himself, then made a lifting motion with his arms. "We can't carry them," Sophie whispered. "They're too heavy and still chained." Noah shook his head frantically, then made a sliding motion with his hands. Sophie's eyes widened as she understood. They couldn't carry the dogs up the ravine, but maybe they could slide them down it, following the water to the creek at the bottom, away from whoever was watching from above. It was risky. The creek could be flooding, and the dogs were already weak, but staying put felt even more dangerous. Sophie nodded, squeezing Noah's hand to show she understood. Slowly, carefully, they began to dig out more of the mud surrounding the dogs, working in darkness, pausing whenever lightning illuminated the ravine. The water was rising faster now, reaching Sophie's knees as they crouched in the mud. If they didn't move soon, they'd all be in danger of drowning. Another flash of lightning revealed the figure was gone from the ridge. Sophie felt a momentary relief that disappeared instantly when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving through undergrowth, coming around the ravine. Someone was circling, looking for a way down to them. "Now," Sophie whispered urgently. "We have to go now." Together, they pulled at the dogs, freeing them enough to slide through the mud. The animals were too weak to resist or help, dead weight in their arms. The chain dragged between them, heavy and unyielding. Sophie positioned herself behind the female, whose broken leg made her whimper with every movement. Noah did the same with the male. "On 3, Sophie whispered. "We push them and ourselves down toward the creek. Stay right behind your dog. Use it like a sled. Ready? 1, 2, 3. They shoved the dogs forward, and the slick mud did the rest. The animals' bodies slid down the ravine like macabre toboggans, gathering speed as they descended toward the swollen creek below. Sophie and Noah followed right behind, using their bodies as ballast and steering as best they could in the darkness. Mud flew everywhere. The female dog yelped in pain. The chain rattled between them, and behind it all, Sophie thought she heard a shout of anger from somewhere above. They hit the bottom of the ravine hard, splashing into the creek that had swelled with rainwater. It was only a few feet deep, but the current was strong, tugging at them immediately. "Hold on to the dog!" Sophie shouted over the storm, no longer worried about being quiet. Speed was their only advantage now. The creek carried them away from the ravine, through the forest. Sophie struggled to keep her head above water while maintaining her grip on the female shepherd. Ahead, she could just make out Noah clinging to the male, his small form nearly invisible in the darkness. The creek twisted and turned through the woods, carrying them farther from the road, deeper into the forest. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, the water slowed as the creek widened into a small pool. Sophie dragged herself and the female dog to the muddy bank, gasping for breath. "Noah!" she called, panic rising again when she didn't immediately see him. A small splash to her left made her whip around. There was Noah, pulling the male dog onto the bank with strength that seemed impossible for his size. Relief flooded through Sophie as she scrambled over to help him. Both dogs lay motionless on the bank, the chain between them gleaming dully whenever lightning flashed. The female's breathing was shallow and rapid, her broken leg twisted at an even worse angle now. The male's eyes were closed, but his chest still rose and fell weakly. "We need to get them somewhere safe," Sophie said, pushing her soaked hair from her face. "And warm. And we need to break this chain." Noah nodded, then froze, his eyes fixed on something over Sophie's shoulder. She turned, following his gaze, and saw distant lights moving through the trees, flashlights bobbing up and down. The search party, or... "We can't stay here," Sophie decided, unwilling to take chances. "We need to keep moving." She looked around desperately for something to help them transport the dogs. They'd gotten lucky with the creek carrying them this far, but the animals were too heavy to drag much farther. Noah tugged at her sleeve again, then pointed. At first, Sophie couldn't see what he was indicating, but then lightning illuminated the area, revealing an old structure at the edge of the pool, the remains of a boathouse or fishing hut, long abandoned but still partially standing. "Good eye," Sophie whispered. They dragged the dogs toward it, seeking any shelter from the rain and hiding place from whoever might be searching for them. The hut was little more than 3 walls and part of a roof, but it was enough to block the worst of the rain. Inside, Sophie found old fishing gear, a moldy canvas tarp, and, most promisingly, a toolbox. "Please, please, please," she muttered, opening it with trembling hands. Inside were rusted fishing hooks, line, a broken reel, and, thank God, a pair of bolt cutters. "Noah, help me position the chain," Sophie said, grabbing the bolt cutters. They were old and rusty, but might be their only chance at freeing the dogs. The chain was thick and industrial grade. Sophie positioned the bolt cutters and squeezed with all her might. The handles dug into her palms painfully, but the chain held. She tried again, grunting with effort. A small hand joined hers on the handles. Noah pushed down alongside her, his face set with determination. "Together," Sophie said. 1, 2, 3. They both pushed with everything they had. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud snap, the chain broke. "We did it," Sophie gasped. The dogs were still connected to separate sections of chain, the heavy collars locked around their necks, but at least they were no longer bound to each other. It would make moving them easier. Outside, the storm was beginning to ease slightly. The rain had lessened, and the gaps between lightning and thunder were growing longer. But with the improving weather came greater visibility and greater danger if someone was still searching for them. "We need to get back to the house," Sophie said, thinking quickly. "But not by the road or the usual paths." Noah nodded, then pointed to the tarp. Sophie understood immediately. They could use it as a makeshift stretcher for the dogs. They spread the tarp on the ground and carefully moved both shepherds onto it. The dogs were so weak they barely reacted, their eyes dull with pain and exhaustion. Sophie's heart ached at their condition, anger flaring at whoever had done this to them. "Okay, we each take an end," Sophie said, grabbing one corner of the tarp. Noah took the other, and together they lifted, creating a hammock for the dogs. It was brutally hard going. The tarp was heavy with two full-grown German shepherds, even emaciated ones. They had to move slowly, navigating through the dark forest, stopping frequently to adjust their grip or check on the dogs. Noah never complained, never hesitated. Even when Sophie could see his small arms trembling with effort, they avoided the main paths, instead following the creek downstream. Sophie knew it eventually passed near the edge of their property. It was the long way home, but hopefully safer. The lights that had been following them seemed to have disappeared, but Sophie remained vigilant, constantly scanning the forest around them. The rain had almost stopped now, though water still dripped from the canopy above. After what felt like hours, Sophie recognized a bent oak tree that marked the boundary of their land. "We're almost home," she told Noah, who nodded tiredly. The cottage came into view, its windows glowing with light. Multiple vehicles were parked outside: Sheriff Davis's patrol car, Elizabeth's red sedan, and several others Sophie recognized as belonging to neighbors. "They're looking for us," Sophie said. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by caution. What if whoever had buried the dogs was watching the house? She stopped at the edge of the tree line, scanning the area carefully. Nothing seemed out of place besides the obvious search party gathered at her home. "I think it's safe," she whispered to Noah, "but let's go around to the back door, just in case." They circled the property, staying in the shadows, and approached the back porch. Sophie set down her end of the tarp gently, and Noah did the same. "Stay here with the dogs," Sophie said. "I'll go in first and make sure everything's okay." Noah shook his head violently, clutching at her arm. His eyes were wide with fear at the thought of being left alone. Okay, Sophie soothed. "We'll all go together." She picked up her end of the tarp again, and they dragged the dogs up the back steps. Sophie balanced the tarp with one hand while she knocked on the door with the other. Almost immediately it flew open. Elizabeth stood there, her face lined with worry that transformed into shock as she took in the sight before her. Sophie and Noah, soaked and mud-covered, with two half-dead German shepherds on a filthy tarp. "My God, Sophie! We've been looking everywhere for—" What on earth happened? Elizabeth stepped back to let them in, her eyes never leaving the dogs. "Call Dr. Harris," Sophie said, referring to the local veterinarian. "Now, these dogs need immediate help." As they dragged the tarp into the kitchen, Sheriff Davis appeared in the doorway, radio in hand. "Morgan, where the hell have you two been? We've had search parties combing—" He stopped mid-sentence, staring at the dogs. "What in God's name?" "Someone buried them alive in Devil's Gully," Sophie said, her voice shaking with exhaustion and anger. "Chained together, left them to drown in the storm." The sheriff's face hardened. He raised his radio. "I need Dr. Harris at the Morgan place. Now, animal abuse case. Life-threatening." Elizabeth had already grabbed towels and was gently trying to clean some of the mud from the female dog's face. "Who would do such a thing?" she whispered. Noah hadn't left the male dog's side. He sat on the floor next to him, one small hand resting on the dog's mud-caked fur. For the first time, Sophie noticed something clutched in Noah's other hand, a broken piece of metal that must have come from the chain when they cut it. "Noah, what's that?" she asked quietly. He opened his palm, revealing what looked like a tag or a medallion. Sophie took it carefully, wiping away the mud with her thumb. There was an engraving, not a name, but a symbol. a triangle inside a circle with what looked like letters or numbers beneath it, too caked with mud to read. Sheriff Davis leaned over her shoulder. "Let me see that." He took the medallion, examining it under the kitchen light. "This isn't a regular dog tag." "What is it?" Sophie asked. Before he could answer, headlights swept across the front of the house. A car door slammed, followed by hurried footsteps on the porch. Dr. Harris burst in, medical bag in hand. "Where are they?" He stopped abruptly at the sight of the two shepherds on Sophie's kitchen floor. "Jesus Christ!" He knelt immediately, pulling supplies from his bag. "What happened to them?" As Sophie repeated the story, Dr. Harris examined both dogs, his face growing grimmer by the minute. The female's leg is definitely broken, multiple fractures by the feel of it, and not from an accident. This was done deliberately. He moved to the male. "This one's in shock, severe dehydration, probable internal injuries." "Will they make it?" Sophie asked, holding Noah's shoulders tightly. Dr. Harris didn't answer immediately, continuing his examination. "They need IVs, antibiotics, X-rays, possibly surgery." He looked up at Sophie. "I need to get them to my clinic right away." Sheriff Davis nodded. "I'll help you load them into your truck." As they prepared to move the dogs, Noah suddenly lunged forward, placing himself between the adults and the animals. He shook his head frantically. "Noah, sweetheart, they need medical care," Sophie said gently. "Dr. Harris is going to help them." Noah didn't budge. Instead, he pointed at the female dog's collar, then at his own neck, making a circular motion with his finger. "The collars?" Dr. Harris asked. "Yes, we'll remove those at the clinic." Noah shook his head again, more insistently this time. He mimed inserting something into the collar, then made a scanning motion. Dr. Harris's eyes widened. "Smart kid. You think there's something in the collar?" He ran his fingers carefully around the female's neck, feeling under the heavy metal. "There's definitely something embedded here." Sheriff Davis leaned in. "Like a tracking device?" A chill ran down Sophie's spine. If the dogs had trackers, whoever had buried them could find them again. "We need to remove them now," she said urgently. Dr. Harris nodded, pulling tools from his bag. "Hold her steady," he instructed Elizabeth, who knelt to help. With careful precision, he located a small panel on the collar and pried it open. Inside was a black device no bigger than a stamp. Dr. Harris extracted it, then repeated the process with the male's collar. "I've never seen anything like this," he muttered, examining the devices. "These aren't standard pet microchips." Sheriff Davis took one, turning it over in his hand. "This is military-grade tracking tech, not something you can buy at a pet store." A strange silence fell over the kitchen as everyone processed the implications. These weren't ordinary abandoned dogs. Someone had gone to extreme lengths to control, track, and ultimately try to kill them, and that someone might still be looking for them. The female German shepherd whimpered softly, her eyes flickering open. They were a startling amber color, intelligent despite her weakened state. She looked directly at Noah, who still stood protectively beside her. Then, in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by adults frozen in shock and confusion, something extraordinary happened. Noah knelt beside the dog and placed his small hand gently on her head. His lips moved, and at first, Sophie thought she was imagining it. But then she heard it, faint but unmistakable. The first words her son had spoken in 8 long months. "Don't worry," he whispered to the dog. "I won't let them hurt you again." Everyone in the kitchen froze. Sophie's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Her son had spoken, actually spoken, for the first time since Daniel's death. "Noah," she whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might break whatever spell had been cast. Noah didn't look up at her. His focus remained entirely on the injured dog, his small hand gently stroking her mud-caked fur. The female German shepherd's amber eyes stayed locked on his, as if they understood each other on some level beyond words. Dr. Harris cleared his throat softly. "We really need to get these animals to my clinic," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Every minute counts." Noah looked up then, his brown eyes swimming with tears, but filled with a resolve Sophie hadn't seen in months. He nodded once, decisively, then pointed to himself, and then to the dogs. "You want to come with them?" Dr. Harris asked, immediately understanding. Noah nodded again, more vigorously. Of course, the veterinarian agreed without hesitation. They seem calmer with you anyway. Sheriff Davis stepped forward, the broken medallion still in his hand. I'll follow you to the clinic. I want to document everything about these dogs, their injuries, these trackers, this medallion. Someone committed a serious crime here, and I'm going to find out who. Sophie felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was beginning to ebb, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Elizabeth noticed immediately and guided her to a chair. You two are soaked to the bone and probably half frozen, she said briskly. Sophie, you need to get cleaned up and into dry clothes before you come to the clinic. I'm not leaving Noah, Sophie said firmly. I'll stay with him, Elizabeth promised. Get changed quickly, grab some clothes for Noah, and meet us there. 10 minutes tops. Sophie hesitated, looking at her son. Noah met her eyes and gave her another small nod, as if to say it was okay. It was such a normal, everyday interaction, the kind they'd had hundreds of times before the accident, that it made Sophie's heart clench painfully. 10 minutes, she agreed, squeezing Noah's shoulder before racing to find dry clothes. By the time Sophie arrived at the small veterinary clinic on the edge of town, a crowd had already gathered outside. News traveled fast in Willow Creek, and the story of two abused German shepherds found buried alive was exactly the kind of thing that brought out the entire community. Sophie parked hastily and pushed through the crowd, ignoring the questions being fired at her from all sides. Inside, the clinic's waiting room was mercifully empty except for Sheriff Davis, who was speaking quietly into his radio. They're in the back, he told Sophie as she entered. Elizabeth and your boy are with them. Harris is working on the female's leg now. Thanks, Sophie said, hurrying through the door that led to the treatment areas. She found Noah sitting on a small stool between two examination tables. On one lay the female shepherd, sedated while Dr. Harris and his assistant worked on her broken leg. On the other was the male, receiving fluids through an IV. Elizabeth stood nearby, her arms folded, watching everything with sharp eyes. Noah was still filthy with mud, wearing one of Sophie's oversized sweatshirts that Elizabeth must have found at the clinic. But he didn't seem to notice or care about his state. His attention was entirely on the dogs, his gaze moving back and forth between them with obvious concern. How are they? Sophie asked quietly, setting down the bag of clean clothes she'd brought for Noah. Dr. Harris glanced up from his work. Touch and go. The female. Luna, Noah interrupted in a small, scratchy voice. The room went silent again. Noah cleared his throat and pointed to the female. Her name is Luna. Then he pointed to the male. His name is Max. Sophie felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. 2 sentences? After 8 months of silence, her son had spoken 2 complete sentences in one night. Dr. Harris recovered quickly. Luna's leg was broken in at least 2 places, deliberately, I'd say, based on the fracture patterns. I've seen this kind of thing before in fighting dogs, breaking a leg to make them more vicious. His face darkened with anger. She also has older scars consistent with electrical burns, probably from a shock collar or worse. He turned to the male, to Max. He's suffering from dehydration, malnutrition, and has some internal bleeding we're monitoring. Both have what appear to be surgical scars under their fur, though I can't tell what kind of procedures they might have had without further tests. Will they survive? Sophie asked, the question she'd been afraid to voice. Luna's chances are good, now that we've got her stabilized. Max ... Dr. Harris's professional mask slipped, showing his concern. The next 12 hours will be critical for him. Noah stood up suddenly, his small body tense. He has to live, he said, his voice stronger now. They need each other. Dr. Harris nodded solemnly. We're doing everything we can, son. Sheriff Davis appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Harris, can I talk to you outside for a minute? The veterinarian followed him out, leaving Sophie, Noah, and Elizabeth with the dogs and the assistant, who continued monitoring both animals. Noah, honey, let's get you cleaned up, Sophie suggested gently, picking up the bag of clothes. There's a bathroom right over there. You'll feel better in dry clothes. Noah hesitated, looking at the dogs. I'll watch them, Elizabeth promised, and I'll come get you immediately if anything changes. Finally, Noah nodded and allowed Sophie to lead him to the small bathroom. As she helped him out of the muddy sweatshirt and began to gently clean his face and hands with warm water, Sophie fought to keep her emotions in check. You spoke, she said softly, trying to sound casual while her heart pounded with hope and joy and fear all mixed together. Noah looked at her through the mirror, his brown eyes, so like Daniel's, serious and somehow older than his 5 years. "They needed me," he said simply. Sophie swallowed hard. "I'm so proud of you, Noah. So proud." He didn't respond to that, but he didn't pull away when she hugged him tightly, his small body warm against hers. When they returned to the treatment room, Dr. Harris was back, his conversation with Sheriff Davis clearly having troubled him. He was checking Max's vitals with sharp, worried movements. "What's wrong?" Sophie asked immediately. Dr. Harris glanced at Noah, then at Sophie, clearly weighing how much to say in front of the child. But Noah had already picked up on the tension. "Is Max worse?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "No, he's holding steady," Dr. Harris assured him, then addressed Sophie. "Sheriff Davis ran that medallion through the system. It's not registered to any known organization, but the symbol matches one that was found in a case over in Riverdale County last year." He lowered his voice. "A case involving illegal animal experimentation." Sophie's blood ran cold. "What kind of experimentation?" Dr. Harris shook his head. "The details were kept quiet. All the sheriff knows is that authorities shut down some kind of research facility, but most of the people involved disappeared before they could be arrested." "You think Luna and Max came from there?" Sophie whispered. "It would explain the surgical scars, the tracking devices, the deliberate injuries," Dr. Harris replied grimly, "and why someone might be desperate to get rid of evidence." Noah had moved back to his stool between the tables, but Sophie could tell from the set of his shoulders that he was listening to every word. She wanted to shield him from this, but it was already too late. He had been the one to find the dogs after all. "What happens now?" she asked. "Sheriff Davis has contacted the state authorities who handled the Riverdale case. They're sending someone first thing in the morning." Dr. Harris checked his watch, "which is only a few hours from now." "And the dogs? What happens to them?" "That will be up to the authorities, I imagine," Dr. Harris said carefully. "If they're evidence in an ongoing investigation—" "No," Noah said suddenly, his voice firm despite its softness. "They're not evidence. They're Luna and Max." Dr. Harris looked uncomfortable. "Son, I understand how you feel, but—" "We protect them," Noah interrupted, standing up. "We promised." Sophie put her hand on Noah's shoulder. "We'll do everything we can," she assured him, then looked at Dr. Harris. "Is there any way we can foster them, at least until they're recovered? They've been through enough without being put in cages somewhere." Before Dr. Harris could answer, a commotion erupted from the waiting room. Raised voices, heavy footsteps, the sound of Sheriff Davis trying to calm someone down. "Stay here, Doctor," Harris ordered, heading for the door. But before he reached it, it swung open. A tall man in a crisp black uniform stepped in, flanked by Sheriff Davis, who looked both annoyed and uncertain. The stranger was in his 40s with close-cropped hair and the rigid posture of someone with military training. On his chest was a badge Sophie didn't recognize, silver with a logo that looked vaguely governmental. "Dr. Harris?" the man said, his voice clipped and professional. "I'm Agent Reeves, Canine Recovery Unit. I understand you've located 2 of our missing assets." "Canine Recovery Unit?" Dr. Harris repeated, skepticism evident in his tone. "I've never heard of such an agency." The man, Agent Reeves, smiled thinly and produced an ID card from his pocket. "We're a specialized division tasked with recovering high-value canine assets used in government work. Those 2 German Shepherds were part of a training program that suffered a security breach last month." Sheriff Davis frowned. "I've already contacted the state authorities about—" "I'm afraid there's been some confusion," Reeves interrupted smoothly. "This is a federal matter, not state. I have the paperwork here authorizing the immediate transfer of these animals to our facility." He held out a folder filled with official-looking documents. Sophie felt Noah's body go rigid under her hand. He was staring at Agent Reeves with undisguised suspicion and fear. Dr. Harris took the folder, but didn't open it immediately. "These dogs have severe injuries consistent with abuse. The female has a broken leg that I've just set. The male is in critical condition. Neither can be transported safely right now." Reeves's expression hardened slightly. "I understand your concern, Doctor, but we have specialized medical facilities for our K9s. They'll receive the best care possible." "How did you find out they were here?" Sophie asked suddenly. We only discovered them a few hours ago. Reeves turned his cool gaze on her. We've been tracking them since they went missing. Our dogs are microchipped. You mean those tracking devices we removed from their collars? Dr. Harris asked pointedly. A flicker of something, annoyance, worry, crossed Reeves's face before his professional mask slipped back into place. Collar trackers are standard backup to internal microchips. And the chains? Sophie pressed. Is it also standard procedure to chain your dogs together and bury them alive in a ravine during a storm? Reeves's eyes narrowed. Ms. Morgan, Sophie Morgan. Ms. Morgan, I understand you're upset by what you've seen, but I assure you we did not harm these animals. They were stolen from our facility by activists who apparently decided they couldn't handle them and abandoned them in that ravine. We've been searching for them ever since. Noah was trembling now, either with fear or rage. Sophie couldn't tell which. His eyes never left Reeves, tracking his every movement like a prey animal watching a predator. Luna, still sedated on the examination table, suddenly whimpered in her sleep. At the sound, Max lifted his head weakly from the other table, his ears twitching in her direction. Reeves took a step toward them, and Max's reaction was immediate and shocking. Despite his weakened state, he bared his teeth in a silent snarl, the fur on his neck rising. Interesting, Reeves murmured, more to himself than anyone in the room. The bonding protocol was successful. Dr. Harris stepped between Reeves and the dogs. As I said, neither animal is stable enough for transport. As their attending veterinarian, I cannot authorize their release at this time. Reeves's face hardened further. Doctor, these are federal assets worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in training and development. I have the authority to... To what? Sheriff Davis interrupted. To remove evidence from an active investigation into animal cruelty? Because that's what we have here, Agent Reeves. He stepped forward, deliberately placing himself shoulder to shoulder with Dr. Harris. Until I hear differently from my superiors, these dogs are staying right where they are. The tension in the room was palpable. Reeves looked from Sheriff Davis to Dr. Harris, then to Sophie and Noah, calculating. Finally, his gaze settled on the dogs. Very well, he said, his tone clipped. I'll contact my superiors to sort out this jurisdictional misunderstanding. In the meantime, I'll wait outside. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Sophie and Noah. I'd advise you not to get too attached. These are not pets. They're specially bred and trained for work that civilians couldn't begin to understand. After he left, the room remained silent for several long moments, everyone processing what had just happened. I don't like this, Sheriff Davis muttered. That badge and ID looked official, but something's off. Dr. Harris nodded grimly. Those papers he tried to give me, they didn't mention anything about Luna being pregnant. Pregnant? Sophie echoed, surprised. The veterinarian nodded. It's early stages, probably why he didn't notice. But she's definitely carrying puppies. Explains why they didn't just let her die. She's valuable as a breeder. Noah had moved to Luna's side and was gently stroking her head. She was protecting them, he said softly. That's why she fought so hard to stay alive. Sophie exchanged glances with the adults in the room. The pieces were starting to fit together. A secret research facility, specialized breeding, tracking devices, a mysterious agent from an agency none of them had heard of before. I'm calling Judge Thompson, Sheriff Davis decided. We need an emergency protection order for these animals until we figure out what's really going on. I'll stay with them, Doctor, Harris said. My assistant and I will monitor them in shifts. He looked at Sophie and Noah. You two should go home and get some rest. It's been a hell of a night. Sophie knew he was right. Noah was swaying slightly on his feet, exhaustion finally catching up with him. But the thought of leaving Luna and Max with that man lurking outside... Agent Reeves won't get near them, Sheriff Davis promised, reading her concern. I'll have one of my deputies stationed here until further notice. Noah tugged at Sophie's sleeve, then pointed to Luna and made a gesture like he was feeding a baby. I think he's asking if we can come back to help with the puppies when they're born, Sophie translated, amazed at how easily she still read her son's nonverbal communications, even though he'd started speaking again. Dr. Harris smiled, the first genuine smile Sophie had seen from him all night. Of course you can. In fact, I could use the help. Luna's going to need special care during her pregnancy, especially with that leg healing. Noah nodded solemnly, as if accepting an important mission. Then he leaned down to whisper something in Luna's ear that Sophie couldn't hear. As they prepared to leave, Sheriff Davis pulled Sophie aside. "Keep your doors locked when you get home," he said quietly, "and call me immediately if you see or hear anything suspicious." Sophie swallowed hard, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "You don't think he'd—" "I don't know what to think," the sheriff admitted. "But those dogs are obviously important to someone with resources and connections. Until we know exactly what we're dealing with, better safe than sorry." Noah was reluctant to leave, but eventually allowed Sophie to lead him out through a back entrance, avoiding both the crowd out front and, more importantly, Agent Reeves. Elizabeth drove them home, insisting on checking the house before leaving them alone. "I'll be back first thing in the morning to take you to the clinic," she promised. "Try to get some sleep." But sleep was elusive. Sophie lay in bed, listening to the house settle and the occasional car pass by on the road, jumping at every sound. Around dawn, she finally drifted off, only to be awakened by Noah climbing into her bed. "Bad dream," she murmured, automatically making room for him beside her. "We need to protect them," Noah said, his voice clearer now with use. "The man in black wants to hurt them again." Sophie pulled him close. "Sheriff Davis won't let that happen, and neither will we." Noah looked up at her, his eyes serious. "Promise?" "I promise," Sophie said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Whatever was going on, whatever danger might come, she would not let Noah down. Not when he was finally finding his voice again. They dozed fitfully until Elizabeth arrived, bringing fresh coffee and pastries from the local bakery. "How are our heroes this morning?" she asked cheerfully, though Sophie could see the worry behind her smile. Noah was already pulling on his shoes. "We need to go see Luna and Max," he said, his voice still small but growing more confident with each word. The veterinary clinic was quieter this morning, the crowd from last night having dispersed. Deputy Miller nodded to them from his post by the door as they entered. "All quiet," he reported. "That Reeves fellow left around 3 a.m., said he'd be back with clarification from his superiors." The deputy made air quotes around the last words, his skepticism clear. Dr. Harris looked exhausted but pleased when they found him checking on the dogs. "Luna's doing well," he announced. "The break is clean, and she's young and otherwise healthy. Good odds for a full recovery." "And Max?" Sophie asked anxiously, noticing the male shepherd was still hooked up to IVs. "Stabilized overnight. His internal bleeding has stopped. He's not out of the woods yet, but I'm cautiously optimistic." Noah went straight to Max, placing his small hand on the dog's head. Max's eyes opened, focusing immediately on the boy. His tail thumped weakly against the table. "He remembers you, Doctor," Harris said, sounding impressed. "That's a good sign." Luna was awake too, watching Noah with those intelligent amber eyes. When he moved to her side, she tried to lift her head to nuzzle his hand. "Easy, girl," Dr. Harris cautioned. "That leg needs to stay still." Noah gently stroked her head, then looked at the veterinarian. "When will the puppies come?" "Not for a while yet. She's only a few weeks along." Sophie watched her son with the dogs, marveling at the transformation. The silent, withdrawn child of yesterday was gone, replaced by a boy with purpose and determination. All because of two abused German shepherds who needed him as much as he needed them. A commotion from the front of the clinic shattered the peaceful moment. Raised voices, then Deputy Miller's authoritative tone. "Sir, you can't go back there without—" The treatment room door burst open. Agent Reeves stood there, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were two men in similar black uniforms, both large and imposing. "Dr. Harris," Reeves said, his voice colder than it had been the night before. "I have the authorization here." He held up an official-looking document with multiple signatures and seals. "These animals are to be remanded to federal custody immediately." Sophie instinctively moved to Noah's side, placing herself between him and the men. "Sheriff Davis said—" "Sheriff Davis has been informed that this is now a federal matter," Reeves cut her off. "My men will tranquilize and transport the subjects." Noah's arms went around Luna's neck protectively. "No!" he shouted, his voice stronger than Sophie had heard it in nearly a year. "You won't take them." Reeves's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened as they fixed on Noah. "Step away from the dog, son." "Agent Reeves," Dr. Harris began, trying to sound reasonable despite the tension radiating from him. These animals are still in critical condition. The female has a broken leg and is pregnant. Moving them now could... Pregnant? Reeves interrupted, genuine surprise flashing across his face. Are you certain? Dr. Harris nodded. Early stages, but yes, definitely pregnant. A calculating look crossed Reeves's face. That changes things. He turned to one of his men and muttered something Sophie couldn't hear. I don't care what papers you have, she said firmly. These dogs were abused and abandoned. You can't just take them. Ms. Morgan, Reeves said, his patience clearly wearing thin. These are not ordinary dogs. They are specialized assets developed through years of research and training. Their value goes far beyond what you can comprehend. What kind of research? Dr. Harris demanded. Because the injuries I've treated look more like torture than science. Reeves ignored the question, focusing instead on Noah, who still had his arms around Luna's neck. That dog isn't what you think she is, son. She and the male were bred and trained for a specific purpose. They aren't pets. They can be dangerous. Noah looked up at him, brown eyes blazing with a conviction that startled Sophie. They're only dangerous to people who hurt them, he said clearly. Something shifted in Reeves' expression, surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. He studied Noah for a long moment, then glanced at Luna, who was watching the exchange with those intelligent eyes. Before Reeves could respond, the clinic door burst open again, and Sheriff Davis strode in, his face thunderous. Reeves, what part of wait for proper authorization did you not understand? I have the authorization right here, Sheriff, Reeves replied coolly, holding up the document again. I don't care if it's signed by the president himself, Sheriff Davis snapped. Judge Thompson issued an emergency protection order for these animals an hour ago. They're not going anywhere until our investigation is complete. For a moment, the two men stared each other down, neither willing to back down. Sophie held her breath, positioning herself more firmly between Noah and the agents. Finally, Reeves folded the document and tucked it into his jacket. Very well, Sheriff. We'll do this the official way. He turned to Sophie and Noah, his expression unreadable. But understand this, those dogs are going to come with us eventually. Their work is too important to be left in civilian hands. As he and his men turned to leave, Noah called after him, his voice ringing clear in the suddenly quiet room. They have names. They're Luna and Max, not subjects or assets. Reeves paused in the doorway, looking back at Noah with an expression Sophie couldn't interpret. Interesting, he murmured, almost to himself. Then he was gone, his men following silently behind him. The room seemed to exhale collectively once they had left. Sheriff Davis's shoulders slumped slightly as the tension drained. That was too close, he muttered. I don't like this, Harris. Something's very wrong here. Noah hadn't moved from Luna's side, his arms still protectively around her neck. The dog's amber eyes remained fixed on the door where Reeves had stood, a low rumble of warning still vibrating in her chest. What do we do now? Sophie asked, her voice unsteady. He said they'd be back. Sheriff Davis rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Judge Thompson's order buys us some time, but Reeves is right about one thing. If this really is federal, there's only so much a local judge can do. Noah looked up, his face set with determination that seemed impossibly mature for his 5 years. They can't have them, he said firmly. Luna and Max belong with us now? Sophie met her son's gaze, seeing in it a strength and purpose that had been missing for so long. In the space of one stormy night, Noah had not only found his voice again, but also a cause worth fighting for. We'll find a way, she promised him, and in that moment, she meant it more than any promise she'd made since the day she'd vowed to love Daniel until death did them part. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was just how far they would all have to go to keep that promise, or how much danger still lurked in the shadows, watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. Do you think Sophie and Noah will be able to protect Luna and Max from Agent Reeves? What do you think these dogs were really trained for? For the next 3 days, the veterinary clinic became their second home. Sophie arranged to take emergency leave from the flower shop, and Noah refused to leave Luna and Max for more than a few hours at a time. Dr. Harris, impressed by Noah's dedication and the calming effect he had on the dogs, welcomed their help. The German Shepherds were recovering, slowly but steadily. Luna's leg was healing well, though she would need weeks of rest before she could put weight on it again. Max had finally stabilized enough to be taken off the IV fluids, though he remained weak and wary of anyone who wasn't Noah. There had been no sign of Agent Reeves since his confrontation with Sheriff Davis, but his absence brought little comfort. Sophie felt eyes on them whenever they went to or from the clinic, though she never caught anyone watching. Sheriff Davis maintained a deputy on guard duty around the clock, and Judge Thompson had extended the emergency protection order for another week, but everyone knew it was just buying time. On the fourth morning, Sophie was sipping coffee in Dr. Harris's office, while Noah sat between the dogs' kennels, reading a picture book aloud to them in his still hesitant voice, when Elizabeth burst in, her face flushed with excitement. "You need to see this," she said, thrusting her tablet into Sophie's hands. The screen showed a news article from a local paper 2 counties over. The headline made Sophie's blood run cold. "Investigation into abandoned research facility deepens. Animal testing allegations surface." "Scroll down," Elizabeth urged. Sophie did, scanning quickly. The article detailed an ongoing investigation into a private research facility called NeuroCorp that had been shut down 8 months earlier. Authorities had originally been investigating corporate espionage, but had discovered evidence of illegal animal testing, specifically on canine subjects. Most disturbing was the mention of experiments involving enhanced cognitive capabilities and advanced behavioral conditioning. "They were making smart dogs?" Sophie asked, confused. Elizabeth's eyes gleamed. "Not just smart. There's a quote from a whistleblower, a former employee who's been cooperating with investigators. They were trying to develop dogs with advanced problem-solving abilities, enhanced memory, and heightened empathy. The ultimate service animals." Sophie glanced over at Luna and Max, watching as Noah turned the page of his book. Both dogs seemed to be following along, their eyes tracking his finger as he pointed to each word. "You think that's where they came from? This NeuroCorp place?" Elizabeth nodded. "It gets better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. The facility was shut down because they lost funding after some of their experiments failed. But according to the whistleblower, a splinter group of researchers continued the work illegally, focusing on a new generation of enhanced dogs. They called it Project Empathy." Sophie felt a chill run down her spine. Luna and Max could be from Project Empathy, yes. Elizabeth took the tablet back and pulled up another article. "And here's the kicker. There's no record of any legitimate K9 recovery unit in any federal database. Sheriff Davis's contact at the FBI has never heard of it." Before Sophie could process this, Noah appeared in the doorway, his expression troubled. "Luna's scared," he said quietly. Sophie immediately followed him back to the kennel area. Luna was on her feet, an improvement in itself, but pacing anxiously despite her splinted leg. Max was alert too, his ears forward, a low whine escaping his throat. "What's wrong with them?" Sophie asked, looking around for any obvious threat. Noah shook his head. "She keeps looking out there." He pointed to the small window high on the wall that overlooked the clinic's parking lot. Sophie dragged a chair over and stood on it to peek outside. At first she saw nothing unusual, just the half-empty parking lot and the edge of the main street beyond. Then a black SUV cruised slowly past, identical to the one they'd seen the night of the storm. "Get Dr. Harris," Sophie told Elizabeth, who had followed them in, "and call Sheriff Davis. They're back." Elizabeth ran to find the veterinarian, while Sophie lifted Noah and carried him to the back of the clinic, away from any windows. "Stay here with Luna and Max," she instructed, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'm going to help Dr. Harris make sure all the doors are locked." Noah nodded solemnly, positioning himself between the dogs' kennels. Max had managed to stand as well now, his hackles raised despite his weakness. Whatever training these dogs had received, their protective instincts were clearly intact. Sophie found Dr. Harris already securing the front entrance, his face grim. Elizabeth called the sheriff. "He's on his way, but it'll take at least 15 minutes. He was out at the highway accident." "We need to move the dogs," Sophie said urgently. "If Reeves has brought reinforcements—" "Already ahead of you," Dr. Harris interrupted, leading her back toward the kennels. "There's a service entrance that leads to the alley behind the building. My truck is parked back there. If we need to evacuate, that's our best option." A sharp knock on the front door made them both freeze. Through the frosted glass, Sophie could make out the silhouette of a tall man in dark clothing. "Dr. Harris?" Agent Reeves's voice called, all pretense of politeness gone. "I know you're in there. We need to talk." Dr. Harris motioned for Sophie to stay quiet and return to the kennel area. She nodded and backed away slowly, her heart pounding. "I'll be right there, doctor," Harris called, buying time. "Just finishing up with a patient." Sophie rushed back to find Noah, with one hand in each kennel, somehow managing to keep both dogs calm despite the tension in the air. Elizabeth had already opened the kennels and attached leashes to both animals. "Back door?" she whispered to Sophie, who nodded. "Doctor, Harris said there's a service exit to the alley. His truck is back there." Elizabeth nodded, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by steely determination. "Then, let's not waste any time. Noah, can you help Luna walk? She'll trust you the most." Noah nodded, taking Luna's leash. The German Shepherd limped heavily on her splinted leg, but stayed close to the boy's side, alert and watchful. Max was another matter. Still weak from his injuries, he struggled to stand for more than a few moments. "I'll carry him," Sophie decided, though the dog probably weighed almost as much as she did. To her surprise, Max allowed her to hoist him up without resistance, as if understanding the urgency of their situation. His eyes remained fixed on Luna and Noah, never losing sight of them, even as Sophie hefted his weight awkwardly in her arms. They moved as quietly as possible through the clinic's back hallway, past storerooms and a small surgical suite, toward the service entrance. From the front of the building, they could hear Dr. Harris's voice, still stalling, and Reeves's increasingly impatient responses. "Just doing my legally mandated duty to protect animals in my care," Dr. Harris was saying. "Your duty is interfering with a federal investigation," Reeves snapped. "Those dogs are property of—" The rest was cut off as they reached the service door. Elizabeth carefully pushed it open, peering into the alley before motioning them forward. Dr. Harris's truck sat just a few yards away, a weathered blue pickup that had seen better days. "Keys?" Sophie whispered as they reached it. Elizabeth produced a set from her pocket. "He gave them to me earlier, just in case. I'll drive." She unlocked the truck and helped Sophie load Max into the back seat. The dog immediately tried to stand again, searching for Luna, who was struggling up the step with Noah's help. "It's okay, boy," Sophie soothed. "She's coming." Once all four of them were crammed into the cab, Elizabeth driving, Sophie in the passenger seat, and Noah in the back with both dogs. Elizabeth started the engine. The truck's loud rumble seemed to echo off the buildings around them. "Which way?" she asked, already pulling away from the clinic. Sophie hesitated. They couldn't go back to her cottage. That would be the first place Reeves would look. They needed somewhere safe to hide until Sheriff Davis could sort this out. "My grandmother's cabin," Elizabeth suggested, as if reading her thoughts. "Up by Lakeside Point. It's empty this time of year, and no one would think to look for us there." "Perfect," Sophie agreed, just as her phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Harris. "They're inside. Get out now." Elizabeth didn't need to be told twice. She gunned the engine, the old truck lurching forward and out of the alley onto a side street, away from the clinic and, hopefully, away from Agent Reeves and his men. They took back roads out of town, avoiding the main highway. Luna whimpered occasionally when the truck hit a rough patch, jostling her broken leg, but otherwise both dogs remained remarkably calm considering the circumstances. Noah kept one hand on each of them, murmuring reassurances in his small, steady voice. "I can't believe we're doing this," Sophie said, half to herself, as the town disappeared behind them and the landscape opened up into rolling hills and scattered farms. Running from supposed federal agents with two German shepherds. Elizabeth's grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled, but her voice remained steady. Not supposed federal agents. Fake ones. Sheriff Davis confirmed it this morning. There is no K-9 recovery unit. Whoever Reeves really is, he's not legitimate. Which makes this even more terrifying, Sophie pointed out. If he's impersonating a federal agent, what else is he capable of? The question hung in the air unanswered as they continued north, toward the mountains and the lake. Elizabeth's grandmother's cabin was about 40 minutes from town, tucked away on 5 acres of wooded land overlooking Lakeside Point. It was small and rustic, but had electricity, running water, and enough isolation to feel safe, at least temporarily. As they drove, Sophie called Sheriff Davis to update him on their location. His response was grim. Reeves and his men had searched the entire clinic, then left in a hurry when they realized the dogs were gone. They were likely already looking for them. "Stay put once you get to the cabin," the sheriff instructed. "I'll come out there as soon as I can." In the meantime, I'm going to contact the FBI directly about these imposters. The cabin appeared exactly as Elizabeth had described it, a small, weathered structure nestled among tall pines, with a wooden porch and a stone chimney. It looked like it hadn't been used in months, but it was solid and, most importantly, hidden from the main road by a screen of trees. Getting the dogs inside was challenging. Max could now walk, albeit shakily, but Luna's splinted leg made navigating the porch steps difficult. Noah, however, had somehow developed an almost supernatural ability to communicate with the German Shepherd. With soft words and gentle touches, he guided her up the steps and into the cabin's main room. Inside was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a worn sofa and 2 armchairs arranged in front of it. A small kitchen with an ancient gas stove occupied the back corner, and Sophie could see 2 doors that presumably led to bedrooms. "Bathrooms through there," Elizabeth confirmed, pointing to a 3rd door near the kitchen. "It's not fancy, but everything should work. Gran had the plumbing updated last year." Sophie helped Noah settle the dogs on a braided rug near the fireplace, then went to check the kitchen for supplies. To her relief, the cabinets contained basic staples: canned goods, pasta, coffee, and even some dog food. Elizabeth's grandmother clearly believed in keeping her cabin stocked for unexpected visits. "I'll get a fire going," Elizabeth offered, already kneeling by the hearth. "It gets cold up here at night, even in spring." Noah hadn't left the dog's side. He sat cross-legged between them, one hand on each, his eyes drifting closed occasionally with exhaustion. The past few days had been overwhelming for all of them, but especially for him. From finding his voice again to becoming the protector of 2 abused animals, it was a lot for a 5-year-old to process. "Why don't you lie down for a bit, sweetheart?" Sophie suggested gently. "The bedroom probably has a bed made up." Noah shook his head stubbornly. "I need to stay with them." Sophie didn't argue. Instead, she grabbed a quilted throw from the sofa and draped it over his shoulders, then settled beside him. Luna watched this exchange with those intelligent amber eyes, then shifted slightly to rest her head against Noah's knee. Max, still weaker but improving, managed to move closer to the boy's other side. The 3 of them together, the silent child and the abused dogs, formed a circle of quiet understanding that made Sophie's throat tight with emotion. Whatever these animals had been through, whatever experiments or training they had endured, they had formed a bond with Noah that seemed unbreakable. Elizabeth got the fire going, its warm light filling the cabin as afternoon began to fade into evening. Outside, wind rustled through the pines, a soothing sound that made the cabin feel like a cocoon of safety. "Sheriff Davis should be here by now," Sophie said, checking her phone for the 12th time. No messages, and worse, no signal. "The reception up here is terrible." "There's a landline in the kitchen," Elizabeth said. "It's ancient, but it works." Sophie went to try it, but the line was dead. "Nothing," she reported, a tendril of unease curling in her stomach. "Maybe the storm knocked it out." Elizabeth frowned. "Maybe. But the storm was days ago." A soft growl from Max broke the moment of concern. The male shepherd was on his feet, ears forward, staring intently at the front door. Luna had raised her head too, though she couldn't stand easily with her splinted leg. Noah was immediately alert. "Someone's coming," he whispered. Sophie's heart began to pound. She dimmed the lantern Elizabeth had lit and moved to the window, carefully pulling back the curtain, just enough to peer outside. The gathering dusk made it hard to see clearly, but she could make out movement among the trees, the glint of a flashlight beam, quickly extinguished. "Get away from the windows," she whispered urgently, moving back to Noah and the dogs. "Someone's out there." Elizabeth joined them by the fireplace, her face pale in the flickering light. "Sheriff Davis?" "He would have called out or knocked," Sophie replied, her mind racing. "And he wouldn't be hiding his flashlight." Max's growl deepened, and even Luna was making a low rumbling sound in her chest. Noah placed a hand on each dog's head, but for once, his touch didn't calm them. "We need to hide," Sophie decided, looking around the small cabin for options. There weren't many. The 2 bedrooms were dead ends, the bathroom too small for all of them. A new sound reached them, the crunch of boots on the porch steps, trying to move stealthily but audible in the absolute silence of the cabin. Then voices, barely more than whispers. "Check around back." "They're in there." Trackers show both subjects inside. Sophie's blood ran cold. Trackers? but they'd remove the devices from the collars. Unless... The microchips, she whispered, remembering Dr. Harris's initial examination. He said they had surgical scars. The trackers must be inside them. Elizabeth's eyes widened with understanding. That's how they found us so quickly. A soft thud came from the back of the cabin, someone trying the rear door. Max was on full alert now, his weakness seemingly forgotten as he positioned himself between the perceived threat and Noah. Luna struggled to her feet as well, limping to join Max in a protective stance. Noah looked up at Sophie, his brown eyes wide but remarkably calm. "They won't take them," he said simply. Before Sophie could respond, the front door burst open with a crash. 2 men in black tactical gear rushed in, followed by Agent Reeves. All 3 carried what looked like tranquilizer guns. "Stand away from the dogs!" Reeves ordered, his voice cold and authoritative. "This doesn't have to get ugly." Sophie pulled Noah against her, but the boy twisted free, placing himself squarely between the men and the German shepherds. "No," he said, his voice small but firm. Reeves's expression hardened. "Son, those animals are dangerous. They've been enhanced through experimental procedures that you can't possibly understand. They need to be contained." "Enhanced how?" Elizabeth demanded, moving to stand beside Noah. "What exactly did you do to them?" A slight smile touched Reeves' lips. "We made them better, smarter, more in tune with human emotions than any animals have ever been. Project Empathy was designed to create the perfect service animals, dogs that could not only detect human distress, but understand and respond to it on an almost human level." Sophie stared at the German shepherds, remembering how they had responded to Noah from the very beginning, how they seemed to understand his silence, his trauma. "But it went wrong, didn't it?" she said, the pieces falling into place. "They became too smart, too aware of what you were doing to them." Reeves's smile disappeared. "There were complications. The female, Luna, as you call her, developed unexpected abilities. She formed emotional bonds with the other subjects that we couldn't break. They became protective of each other, refusing commands that would cause harm to their bonded partners, useless for our purposes. So you decided to kill them," Sophie said, disgust rising in her throat. "Bury them alive during a storm and let nature do your dirty work." "Not me personally," Reeves replied coldly. "But yes, the project was terminated. The assets were to be disposed of, until your son interfered." Noah hadn't moved, his small body still shielding the dogs. Max's growl had risen to a threatening snarl, while Luna watched everything with those intelligent eyes, calculating. "They're not assets," Noah said, his voice stronger now. "They're alive. They feel things. They understand." "Exactly," Reeves said, taking a step closer. "That's what makes them dangerous. Dogs weren't meant to understand the way these do. It makes them unpredictable." One of Reeves's men shifted position, trying to get a clear shot with his tranquilizer gun. Max tracked the movement, his muscles tensing to spring, despite his weakened condition. "Max, no," Noah said quietly, not looking back at the dog, but somehow knowing exactly what he was about to do. To Sophie's amazement, the German shepherd immediately relaxed his stance, though his eyes never left the armed men. Reeves noticed it too. His gaze sharpened, moving from Max to Noah with new interest. "Fascinating," he murmured. "The boy has established control." "Not control," Sophie said fiercely. "Trust, because he hasn't hurt them or treated them like objects." "Call off your men, Reeves," a new voice commanded from the doorway. Sheriff Davis stood there, his service weapon drawn, and pointed steadily at Reeves. Behind him were 2 deputies, similarly armed. "Drop those tranquilizer guns, now." Reeves didn't look particularly concerned. "Sheriff, you're interfering in a classified operation. I suggest you leave before this escalates into a federal case." "That would be a neat trick," Sheriff Davis replied, "considering there is no canine recovery unit and you are not a federal agent. The FBI confirmed it. Now drop your weapons before I charge you with impersonating a federal officer on top of breaking and entering, animal cruelty, and threatening a child." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Reeves's face. He glanced at his men, then back at the sheriff, weighing his options. "This isn't over," he said finally, lowering his tranquilizer gun slowly. His men followed suit. "Those dogs are still property of NeuroCorp, The real authorities will be coming for them. NeuroCorp was shut down 8 months ago, Sheriff Davis said. And according to the FBI, they're very interested in speaking with anyone still claiming to work for their Special Projects Division. So interested, in fact, that they're sending agents from the Charlotte field office to interview you personally. The color drained from Reeves's face. He took a step back, looking suddenly less like a menacing agent and more like a cornered animal himself. That was when Luna made her move. Despite her splinted leg, she lunged forward with surprising speed, grabbing the sleeve of Reeves's jacket in her teeth. The man cried out, not in pain, but in shock, as the German Shepherd dragged him to his knees with one powerful pull. Max was moving too, positioning himself behind one of Reeves's men, effectively cutting off their retreat. The coordinated attack was so quick and efficient that everyone froze for a moment in astonishment. "Call them off!" Reeves shouted, genuine fear in his voice now. Noah stepped forward calmly. He placed a gentle hand on Luna's head, and the dog immediately released Reeves's sleeve, though she remained standing over him, her amber eyes never leaving his face. "They won't hurt you," Noah said quietly. "Even though you hurt them, that's the difference between you and them." Sheriff Davis took the opportunity to move in, handcuffing Reeves while his deputies secured the other men. "Jason Reeves, you're under arrest for impersonating a federal officer, breaking and entering animal cruelty." The list continued, but Sophie wasn't listening. She was watching her son stand between Luna and Max, one hand on each of their heads, their bodies curved protectively around him like living shields. In that moment, it was impossible to tell who was protecting whom, and that, Sophie realized, was exactly the point. These weren't just enhanced dogs. They were creatures capable of genuine connection, of understanding the reciprocal nature of love and protection. Exactly what Noah had needed to find his voice again. As Sheriff Davis led Reeves and his men outside to the waiting patrol cars, Sophie knelt beside her son and the dogs, her heart full of wonder and a fierce determination to keep this unlikely family together, no matter what challenges still lay ahead. What do you think will happen when the real authorities arrive? Will they try to take Luna and Max too, or will Noah's special connection with the dogs convince them to let the shepherds stay? The FBI agents arrived 2 hours later, a man and woman in crisp suits who identified themselves as Special Agents Carter and Rodriguez. They interviewed everyone separately, taking detailed notes about Reeves, his men, and everything that had happened since Noah found the dogs in the ravine. They were particularly interested in the tracking devices Dr. Harris had removed from the collars, which Sheriff Davis had fortunately preserved as evidence. Through it all, Noah refused to leave Luna and Max's side. The agents tried to interview him alone, but the dogs became so agitated when separated from the boy that eventually Agent Rodriguez gave up and conducted her questioning with both German shepherds present. To everyone's surprise, Noah spoke freely with the agent, his voice growing stronger and more confident with each answer. "They understand everything," he told Agent Rodriguez, his hand resting on Luna's head. "They know what people are feeling, even when they don't say it." The female agent's skeptical expression softened as she watched Luna lean against Noah protectively. "And how do you know that, Noah?" "Because they knew I was sad inside, even when I didn't talk about it," he answered simply. "And they knew the men in black were bad, even when they pretended to be good." Agent Rodriguez exchanged glances with her partner, who had been observing silently from the doorway. Something unspoken passed between them before she turned back to Noah with a gentle smile. "You've been very brave," she said, "and you've taken excellent care of Luna and Max. They're lucky to have found you." Noah's solemn expression didn't change. "Are you going to take them away?" The direct question seemed to catch the agent off guard. "We need to figure out what's best for them," she said carefully. "They were part of a research program that went very wrong." "I know what's best for them," Noah said with absolute certainty. "Me." Sophie, who had been watching this exchange from the kitchen doorway, felt her heart swell with a mixture of pride and fear. Her son, who had been lost in silence for so long, was now advocating for these animals with a conviction that seemed beyond his years. Later that night, after the FBI agents had left with promises to return the following day, Sophie tucked Noah into one of the cabin's small bedrooms. Luna and Max lay on the floor beside his bed, their eyes alert despite their exhaustion. "The agents seem nice," Sophie said cautiously, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I think they really want to help. Noah nodded, his eyes already drooping with fatigue. They do. But they still might take Luna and Max. Sophie couldn't deny it. The FBI agents had been clear that the dogs were still considered evidence in an ongoing investigation into NeuroCorp. Once Reeves and his men were fully processed and the immediate danger had passed, decisions would need to be made about the animal's future. "We'll figure something out," she promised, kissing his forehead. "Try to get some sleep, sweetheart." As she rose to leave, Noah caught her hand. "Mom?" The word, so simple and yet so long unspoken, made Sophie's breath catch. "Yes? I'm sorry I stopped talking after Dad died." Tears sprang to Sophie's eyes. She sat back down, gathering her son in her arms. "Oh, Noah, you don't have to be sorry. You were hurting. I thought if I didn't talk about it, it wouldn't be real," he whispered against her shoulder. "But Luna and Max showed me it's still real, even if you don't say it." Sophie held him tighter, her tears falling into his soft hair. "They're pretty special dogs, aren't they?" Noah nodded, pulling back to look at the German shepherds, who watched them with intelligent, understanding eyes. "They were hurt too, but they still wanted to help me. That's why we have to help them now." After Noah finally drifted off to sleep, Sophie found Sheriff Davis and Elizabeth sitting at the cabin's small kitchen table, speaking in low voices. "How is he?" Elizabeth asked as Sophie joined them. "Asleep finally. The dogs won't leave his side." Sophie accepted the cup of coffee Sheriff Davis pushed toward her. "What happens now?" The sheriff sighed heavily. "The FBI has jurisdiction over the NeuroCorp investigation. Reeves and his men are being transported to the federal detention center in Charlotte tonight. They'll face charges for impersonating federal agents, attempted kidnapping, animal cruelty. The list goes on." "But what about Luna and Max?" Sophie pressed. "The agents didn't really say what would happen to them." Sheriff Davis and Elizabeth exchanged a look that made Sophie's stomach tighten with apprehension. "They're valuable research subjects," Elizabeth said gently. "The FBI will want to understand exactly what was done to them. And there's the puppies to consider too, if Luna's offspring inherit these enhanced abilities." "They're not research subjects," Sophie said fiercely. "They're living, feeling creatures who've already suffered enough. And they've bonded with Noah. You've seen how they are with him, how he is with them. It would be cruel to separate them now." Sheriff Davis nodded sympathetically. "I agree with you, Sophie, but it's not up to me. The best I can do is put in a good word with the agents. Let them know how therapeutic these dogs have been for Noah." "We all will," Elizabeth assured her, reaching across the table to squeeze Sophie's hand. "And Dr. Harris is already preparing a formal veterinary recommendation that the dogs remain in your care for their physical and psychological well-being." Sophie felt a surge of gratitude for these people who had become more than friends through this ordeal. They had become allies, a makeshift family united in their determination to protect Noah and the dogs. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything." Morning came too soon, sunlight filtering through the cabin's dusty windows and the smell of coffee brewing in the ancient percolator. Sophie, who had barely slept, found Noah already awake and sitting on the porch steps with both dogs. Luna's leg was clearly bothering her less. She managed to stand and wag her tail when Sophie appeared. "They're hungry," Noah announced, looking up at his mother. "Especially Luna. She's eating for the puppies too." Sophie smiled, still marveling at how easily Noah was speaking now, as if the 8 months of silence had never happened. "Let's see what we can find for breakfast then." They were just finishing a simple meal of oatmeal and canned peaches when the sound of vehicles approaching made everyone tense. Luna and Max were immediately alert, moving to position themselves protectively near Noah. Sheriff Davis, who had spent the night on the cabin's lumpy sofa, went to the window. "It's the FBI agents," he reported, "and someone else, a woman in a lab coat." Sophie's heart sank. A scientist, probably coming to evaluate the dogs, to determine if they were valuable enough to be taken for further study. The FBI agents entered first, their expressions unreadable. "Good morning," Agent Carter greeted them. "I hope we're not too early." Before anyone could respond, the woman in the lab coat stepped in behind them. She was older, perhaps in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "This is Dr. Eleanor Bennett," Agent Rodriguez introduced her. She was the head researcher at NeuroCorp before the company changed direction. Dr. Bennett has been assisting our investigation since the facility was shut down. Dr. Bennett's gaze went immediately to Luna and Max, who had positioned themselves on either side of Noah. Her eyes widened slightly, a mixture of surprise and what looked like relief crossing her face. "They're alive," she breathed. "After all this time?" Noah's arms went around Luna's neck protectively. "You can't take them," he said, his voice small but firm. Dr. Bennett approached slowly, kneeling to bring herself to Noah's level. "You must be Noah," she said gently. "The agents told me how you found Luna and Max in the ravine. That was very brave of you." Noah didn't respond, his expression wary. Max moved slightly in front of him, not growling, but clearly on guard. Dr. Bennett noticed and remained where she was, making no attempt to touch the dogs. "They trust you," she observed. "That's remarkable, given what they've been through." "What exactly did they go through, Doctor?" "Bennett?" Sophie asked, moving to stand behind her son. "We've heard bits and pieces, but we'd like the whole truth." The scientist sighed heavily, lines of regret etching her face. Project Empathy began with the best intentions. We were trying to develop service dogs with enhanced abilities to assist people with PTSD, autism, and other conditions where emotional connection is challenging. The genetic modifications and neural enhancements were designed to increase the dog's natural empathy and communication skills. "But it went wrong," Sheriff Davis prompted when she paused. Dr. Bennett nodded. "The corporate leadership became impatient with our slow, careful approach. They brought in new researchers, people like Jason Reeves, who pushed for more aggressive methods. They wanted weapons, not helpers. Dogs that could be controlled absolutely and used for military applications." Sophie felt sick. "What did they do to Luna and Max specifically?" "Luna was our breakthrough," Dr. Bennett said, looking at the female German Shepherd with something like reverence. "She developed abilities beyond anything we'd anticipated. Not just heightened empathy, but what seemed almost like an emotional intelligence comparable to a human child's. She could read human emotions with uncanny accuracy and respond appropriately. But she was also independent, forming bonds with the other dogs, especially Max." "So they punished her," Noah said quietly. It wasn't a question. Dr. Bennett's eyes filled with tears. "Yes. The new management saw her independence as a flaw, not a miracle. They tried to break her will through methods I protested vehemently. When I threatened to expose them, they fired me and accelerated their program in secret." "And the other dogs?" Elizabeth asked. "Luna and Max weren't the only ones, were they?" "No," Dr. Bennett confirmed. "There were 12 in the original cohort. I've been trying to locate them ever since the facility was shut down, but until now, I feared they had all been eliminated." "There were others in the ravine," Sophie remembered suddenly. Sheriff Davis found remains of at least 3 more dogs buried near where Noah discovered Luna and Max. Dr. Bennett closed her eyes briefly, pain etched on her face. "That fits with what we know. Reeves and his group continued the work illegally after NeuroCorp was shut down. They must have disposed of the dogs they deemed failures." Noah had been listening intently, his young face solemn. Now he looked directly at Dr. Bennett. "Luna's going to have puppies. Will they be special too?" The scientist's expression softened. "It's very likely, yes. The genetic modifications should be heritable." "And that's why you're here," Sophie realized, her heart sinking. "To take them for study." To her surprise, Doctor. Bennett shook her head firmly. "No, Ms. Morgan. I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen." Agent Carter cleared his throat. "Dr. Bennett has been appointed as the scientific consultant for our investigation. Her recommendations regarding the dog's welfare will carry significant weight." "And my recommendation," Dr. Bennett said, her gaze steady, "is that Luna and Max remain exactly where they are, with the boy who saved them and clearly understands them better than any scientist ever could." Sophie hardly dared to believe what she was hearing. "You mean they can stay with us?" "With certain conditions," Agent Rodriguez clarified. "Regular veterinary checkups that Dr. Bennett would oversee, documentation of their development and behavior, and when the puppies are born, a commitment to working with us to ensure they go to appropriate homes, with owners who understand their special needs." Noah looked up at Sophie, hope lighting his eyes for the first time. "We can keep them?" Sophie looked to the FBI agents and Dr. Bennett for confirmation. Agent Carter nodded. Assuming your mother agrees to the conditions, yes. We agree, Sophie said immediately, tears of relief springing to her eyes. Of course we agree. Dr. Bennett smiled, the years of worry seeming to fall away from her face. There's one more thing you should know, she said quietly. Luna and Max weren't just random subjects in our program. They were always special, even before the enhancements. They're littermates, brother and sister, and they've been bonded since birth. That's part of why they resisted all attempts to separate them, and why they were deemed failures by Reeves and his team. But that's not failure, Noah said with absolute certainty. That's love. Dr. Bennett's smile widened. Exactly, young man. That's precisely what Project Empathy was originally meant to understand and enhance, the capacity for love. The weeks that followed were busy ones. Sophie and Noah returned to their cottage, now with 2 German shepherds in tow. Dr. Harris continued to oversee Luna's recovery, her broken leg healing remarkably well, despite the trauma it had endured. Max regained his strength more slowly, but steadily, his eyes always tracking Noah whenever the boy moved around the house or yard. Dr. Bennett visited weekly, observing the dogs and taking careful notes, but never interfering with the bond that had formed between them and Noah. She became a friend rather than a monitor, often staying for dinner and sharing stories of Luna and Max as puppies before the experiments began. They were always the smartest ones, she told Noah one evening, as they sat on the porch swing, watching Luna and Max play carefully in the yard, always figuring out puzzles faster than the others, always working together. Like when they pulled Reeves down at the cabin, Noah said, his eyes shining with pride. They didn't even have to look at each other, they just knew what to do. Dr. Bennett nodded. That's their special connection. The scientists who took over my program saw it as a problem because it meant the dogs couldn't be controlled individually. But it's actually their greatest gift. They understand cooperation and loyalty on a level most humans never achieve. The FBI investigation continued, with Reeves and several of his associates facing multiple federal charges. Sophie gave her testimony, describing that stormy night in the ravine and the subsequent events, but Noah was largely shielded from the legal proceedings. His focus remained where it belonged, on school, which he had returned to with new confidence, and on caring for Luna and Max. Luna's pregnancy progressed normally, her belly growing rounder as summer approached. Dr. Harris monitored her closely, with Dr. Bennett consulting on the potential special needs of puppies born from genetically enhanced parents. There's no precedent for this, Dr. Bennett admitted when Sophie asked what to expect. But based on everything we know about genetic inheritance, the puppies will likely show some level of the same enhanced emotional intelligence. Maybe not as pronounced as in Luna and Max, since they also underwent neural treatments after birth, but still significant. Will they be okay? Sophie worried. I mean, will they be able to live normal dog lives, or will they be too different? Dr. Bennett patted her hand reassuringly. With proper understanding and care, they'll thrive. Just like Luna and Max are thriving now, that they're in a home where their abilities are appreciated rather than exploited. On a warm night in early June, Luna went into labor. Noah, who had somehow sensed it was coming, woke Sophie at midnight. It's time, he said simply, standing in her bedroom doorway in his pajamas. They found Luna in the small den Sophie had converted into a whelping area, lined with soft blankets and positioned away from drafts. Max sat nearby, alert and watchful, his eyes never leaving his sister. Dr. Harris arrived within the hour, bringing his medical bag and a calm, reassuring presence. Dr. Bennett joined them shortly after, her silver hair hastily pulled back, and her eyes bright with scientific curiosity and genuine concern for Luna. Should we take Noah back to bed? Dr. Harris asked Sophie quietly as Luna's contractions intensified. This could take hours, and it might be distressing for him. Before Sophie could answer, Noah spoke up from where he sat beside Luna, gently stroking her head. I'm staying. She needs me. As if confirming his words, Luna whined softly and pressed her head against Noah's hand. Dr. Bennett smiled. He's right. Luna's emotional state directly impacts her labor. Having Noah here is actually medically beneficial. The birth proceeded smoothly, with Luna delivering 7 healthy puppies over the course of 5 hours. 6 were breathing and nursing almost immediately. 3 males and 3 females, all with Luna's tawny coloring and distinctive amber eyes. But the seventh and smallest puppy, a male born last, lay still and silent despite Dr. Harris's efforts to stimulate its breathing. "I'm sorry," he said quietly after several minutes of trying. "Sometimes this happens, especially with the runt of the litter." Noah, who had remained remarkably composed throughout the lengthy birth process, suddenly moved forward. "No," he said firmly, reaching for the tiny, motionless puppy. Dr. Harris hesitated, then gently placed the puppy in Noah's small hands. Noah cradled it close to his chest, bending his head to whisper something no one else could hear. "You're safe now," he told the puppy, his voice barely audible. "Your mom and dad are safe too. No one will hurt you, I promise." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as everyone watched in stunned silence, the tiny puppy's chest heaved once, twice, and it let out a feeble cry. Its little legs began to move, and its eyes, still sealed shut like all newborn puppies, scrunched up as it continued to cry. "That's not possible," Dr. Harris breathed, staring at the now squirming puppy. "It had no heartbeat." Dr. Bennett's expression was one of wonder rather than shock. "The bond," she murmured. "It's stronger than we ever imagined." Luna whined anxiously, trying to see her last-born puppy. Noah carefully placed the tiny creature next to her, where it immediately burrowed against her warm body and found a nipple to nurse. Max moved closer, sniffing the newborn gently before settling next to Luna in a protective position. Sophie wrapped an arm around Noah's shoulders, feeling him trembling slightly from emotion and exhaustion. "You did it, sweetheart," she whispered. "You saved him." Noah leaned against her, his eyes never leaving the puppy he had brought back to life. "Look," he said, pointing to a small white patch on the puppy's chest, barely visible against his light fur. "He has a mark like a moon, like Luna." Dr. Bennett, who had been examining each puppy carefully as it was born, made a note in her journal. "The seventh puppy," she said softly, "born last, marked by the moon, and called back from the threshold by a child's command." She smiled at their confused expressions. In the old stories, such a creature would be considered blessed, a bridge between worlds. As dawn broke outside, casting golden light through the windows of their cottage, Sophie looked at the improbable family they had become. A widow and her once silent son, 2 genetically enhanced German shepherds, and now 7 puppies who might change the world's understanding of the bond between humans and animals. Luna raised her head to look directly at Sophie, those intelligent amber eyes seeming to convey a message clearer than words. "Thank you for believing in us." "No," Sophie whispered, reaching out to gently stroke the dog's head. "Thank you for bringing my son back to me." In the quiet den, surrounded by new life and second chances, the first light of morning illuminated them all with promise. A promise of healing, of connection, and of a future where understanding might bridge the oldest divide of all, that between human and animal, between voice and silence, between sorrow and joy. If you could adopt one of Luna's special puppies, would you want one of the normal 6 or the 7th with the moon marking that Noah saved? Tell us why. The puppies grew quickly, their eyes opening after 2 weeks to reveal that all 7 had inherited Luna's remarkable amber gaze. The tiny 7th puppy, whom Noah had named Comet for the streak of white on his chest, remained the smallest of the litter, but showed a fierce determination to keep up with his siblings. Sophie often found him attempting challenges his larger brothers and sisters had mastered, never giving up until he succeeded. Dr. Bennett visited more frequently now, documenting the puppy's development with scientific precision but obvious affection. "They're all showing signs of enhanced cognition," she reported one afternoon as they watched the 3-week-old puppies attempt to navigate an obstacle course Noah had built from sofa cushions and cardboard boxes. "Their problem-solving abilities are already beyond what we'd expect from puppies twice their age." "But they're still just puppies," Sophie observed, smiling as one of the females tumbled over her own paws in excitement. "They play and sleep and get into mischief like normal dogs." "That's the miracle of it," Dr. Bennett agreed. "The enhancements didn't make them less dog-like. They simply expanded what being a dog could mean." She watched as Comet, after several failed attempts, finally managed to climb over a cushion barrier his siblings had conquered earlier. They each have distinct personalities too. That's something Reeves and his team never understood or valued. The FBI investigation had uncovered the full extent of NeuroCorp's illegal activities by now. Jason Reeves and several others faced multiple felony charges, and the evidence Sophie and Noah had provided was crucial to the case. The authorities had kept their promise. Luna and Max remained with them. Their status officially changed from evidence to rehabilitated research animals under Dr. Bennett's supervision. As for the puppies, a careful plan was taking shape. Dr. Bennett, working with agents Carter and Rodriguez, had identified several potential homes for them. Families with children who had experienced trauma or challenges similar to Noah's, where the puppy's extraordinary empathic abilities could make a real difference. Except for Comet, Noah had insisted when the plan was first discussed. "He stays with us." No one had argued. The bond between Noah and the smallest puppy had been evident from that first miraculous moment when Noah's whispered words had seemingly called him back to life. Where Noah went, Comet followed, his tiny body perpetually in motion, except when curled up in the boy's lap during quiet moments. Summer unfolded around them, warm and golden. Noah, who had once been silent and withdrawn, now chattered constantly, to Sophie, to his friends who visited to see the puppies, and most of all, to the dogs. He spoke to them as if they understood every word, and Sophie had to admit it certainly seemed like they did. Luna would bring Noah his shoes when he mentioned going outside. Max would retrieve specific toys by name, and the puppies, especially Comet, watched Noah's face when he spoke with an intensity that went beyond normal canine attention. "We'll need to be careful about the attention this might bring," Dr. Bennett cautioned during one of her visits. "If word gets out about what these dogs can do." Sophie understood the concern. There would always be people like Reeves who saw the dogs as assets to be exploited rather than beings to be protected. "What about school?" she asked. "Noah's made so much progress. His therapist thinks he's ready to return full-time in the fall." Dr. Bennett smiled reassuringly. "By then, 6 of the puppies will be in their new homes, which will lower the profile of your household somewhat. And we've established the cover story that Luna and Max are specially trained therapy dogs. It's not even really a lie." Noah had been listening to this conversation from the floor, where he was teaching Comet to retrieve different colored blocks. "People won't hurt them again," he said with absolute certainty. "I won't let them." Sophie and Dr. Bennett exchanged glances, both moved by the 5-year-old's fierce protectiveness, but aware that the world was more complicated than his black and white view allowed for. "That's why we're being so careful about where the puppies go," Dr. Bennett explained gently. "We want them all to have people like you, Noah. People who understand how special they are and will keep them safe." The boy considered this, absently stroking Comet's head. "When do they have to leave?" he asked finally, his voice small despite his determination to be brave about it. "Not for another month," Sophie assured him. "They need to be at least 12 weeks old first, and you'll help choose their families, remember? No puppy goes to a home unless you and Luna approve." This had been Noah's condition, one that Dr. Bennett had backed wholeheartedly. Noah's unique connection with the dogs made him an excellent judge of which potential families would be the right fit. Already he had vetoed 2 candidates the FBI had suggested, citing reasons he couldn't quite articulate, but that boiled down to, Luna doesn't trust them. As the puppy's departure date approached, prospective families began to visit. They came one at a time, spending several hours at the cottage under the watchful eyes of Sophie, Dr. Bennett, and, most critically, Noah and Luna. The puppies, now active and playful at 9 weeks old, interacted with each family while Max and Luna observed from nearby, their posture relaxed but attentive. By the end of July, all 6 puppies had been matched with families. There was Jackson, a 10-year-old boy with autism who connected instantly with the largest male puppy. Emma, a 7-year-old girl who hadn't spoken since witnessing a violent crime, much like Noah's own experience. An Army veteran with PTSD whose nightmares subsided when one of the female puppies curled up beside him. A pediatric hospice nurse who would bring her puppy to work to comfort dying children and their families. Each match seemed perfect, as if the puppies themselves had chosen their people. The day before the first puppy was scheduled to leave with his new family, Noah asked a question that had clearly been weighing on him. "Will they forget us?" he asked Sophie as they sat on the porch swing, watching Luna and Max supervise the puppies' play in the yard. "When they go to their new homes?" Sophie considered her answer carefully. "I don't think they could ever forget you, Noah. You saved their lives, Luna and Max in the ravine, and Comet when he was born. That creates a special kind of bond. But they won't see us anymore, Noah persisted. What if they get sad? What if they miss Luna and Max? Dr. Bennett, who had been preparing notes at the nearby table, joined the conversation. That's a very thoughtful question, Noah. The puppies will certainly miss their birth family at first. That's natural. But they're also resilient, and they have this extraordinary capacity for forming new bonds. She sat down beside him on the swing. And I've been thinking, there might be a way for them to stay connected. Noah's eyes widened with hope. How? Well, normally I'd suggest things like scent items or video calls, which people often use when adopting siblings into different homes. But with these puppies, she hesitated, then continued more confidently. Luna and Max can communicate with each other in ways we don't fully understand, even when they're physically separated. We observed this during the early research. It's possible, I can't promise, but it's possible that the puppies share this ability to some degree. You mean they can talk to each other in their minds? Noah asked, fascinated. Dr. Bennett smiled. Not exactly talking with words the way humans do, more like sharing feelings, impressions, a sense of well-being. If that ability persists across distance, the puppies might be able to maintain a kind of connection with each other, and with Luna and Max. Sophie wasn't entirely sure about this theory, but she could see the comfort it gave Noah. And after everything she'd witnessed these past months, she wasn't prepared to dismiss the idea entirely. These dogs had already defied so many of her expectations about what animals could understand and feel. And we can visit them sometimes, she added, giving Noah's shoulders a squeeze. Dr. Bennett has made sure all the families know they're part of a special project. There will be reunions, data collection days, puppy play dates, Dr. Bennett interjected with a smile. Very important for my research, of course. Noah brightened at this. And they'll all have people who love them, like we love Comet and Luna and Max. Exactly, Sophie confirmed. That's the most important thing. The morning the first puppy, the one chosen by Jackson and his family, was scheduled to leave, Noah surprised Sophie by waking early and asking to take all the puppies for one last walk together. Sophie agreed, touched by his thoughtfulness and maturity in handling the inevitable separations. They walked to the small creek that ran along the edge of their property, where the puppies loved to splash in the shallow water under Luna and Max's watchful eyes. Noah sat on a large rock, Comet immediately climbing into his lap, while the other puppies explored or played in the gentle current. I want to tell you something important, Noah said to the assembled dogs, his voice solemn. Luna and Max sat attentively before him, while the puppies gradually settled, sensing the moment's significance despite their youthful energy. Some of you are going to new homes today and in the next few days, Noah continued. You're going to help people who need you, just like you helped me. Your new families are good, and they'll love you. Sophie, watching from a few steps away, felt tears spring to her eyes at her son's compassionate speech. But you'll always be family, Noah told the puppies. Luna and Max will always be your parents, Comet will always be your brother, and I'll always be your friend forever. As if understanding perfectly, each puppy approached Noah in turn, receiving a gentle pat and whispered words that Sophie couldn't hear. Luna watched this ceremony with those intelligent amber eyes, occasionally nudging a hesitant puppy forward. Max stood guard at the perimeter, alert but calm, as if honoring his son's moment of leadership. The first family arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, Jackson, his parents, and his older sister. The boy, tall for 10 but hesitant in his movements, clutched a new leash and collar, his eyes darting nervously around the unfamiliar setting. Noah, who had been quiet since returning from the creek, stepped forward with the chosen puppy in his arms, the largest male, with a confident demeanor and gentle eyes. His name is Apollo, Noah told Jackson, carefully transferring the puppy to the older boy's arms. He likes when you scratch behind his left ear, and he's really good at knowing when you're feeling overwhelmed. If you talk to him, he understands, even if other people don't. Jackson, who typically avoided eye contact, looked directly at Noah for a brief, powerful moment. Thank you, he said, his voice soft but clear. The puppy, Apollo, licked his chin once, then settled comfortably in his arms as if he'd always belonged there. And so it went, day after day, as each puppy departed for their new home. Noah handled each farewell with the same gentle dignity. sharing specific details about each puppy's personality and preferences with their new families. Sophie marveled at her son's strength and compassion, remembering the silent, withdrawn child he had been just months earlier. "You're amazing. You know that?" she told him after the fifth puppy had left, wrapping him in a hug. "I'm so proud of how you're helping these puppies and their new families." Noah leaned into her embrace, tired but peaceful. "Luna and Max taught me how to be brave," he said simply, "even when it hurts." The last puppy, a female Noah had named Willow, left on a Sunday afternoon with Emma, the 7-year-old who hadn't spoken since witnessing violence. As Noah knelt to say goodbye to Willow, Emma unexpectedly knelt beside him, her small hand tentatively reaching out to stroke the puppy's soft fur. "She likes to sleep with a soft toy," Noah told Emma quietly. "And sometimes she has dreams that make her paws twitch." Emma didn't respond verbally, but she nodded, her eyes fixed on Willow with an intensity that reminded Sophie of Noah when he'd first connected with Luna and Max. As Noah carefully handed the puppy to Emma, the little girl leaned forward and whispered something in Noah's ear. His eyes widened in surprise, then filled with understanding. He nodded solemnly, as if accepting an important mission. Later, after Emma and her parents had left with Willow, Sophie asked Noah what the girl had said to him. "She asked me if it gets easier," Noah replied, sitting on the porch steps with Comet in his lap, and Luna and Max flanking him like guardians. "Finding your voice again." "And what did you tell her?" Sophie asked, sitting beside him. Noah looked out across their yard, where just hours ago all 7 puppies had played together for the last time. "I told her the truth, that sometimes words get stuck inside you because they hurt too much to say. But Willow will help her find them again, like Luna and Max helped me." Dr. Bennett, who had been present for each puppy's departure to assist the new families with the transition, joined them on the porch. "Phase 1 complete," she announced, her professional tone belied by the emotional sheen in her eyes. "All 6 puppies successfully placed with their matched families." "Do you think they'll be okay?" Sophie asked, watching as Luna and Max explored the yard, obviously seeking their missing offspring, despite having witnessed each departure. "I think they'll be remarkable," Dr. Bennett replied with conviction. "Both the puppies and their new families. We'll continue regular check-ins, of course, and, as I promised Noah, we'll arrange reunions periodically." Noah had been quiet, stroking Comet's head rhythmically. Now he looked up at Dr. Bennett with a question that had clearly been troubling him. "What about the bad men? Will they try to find the puppies?" Dr. Bennett's expression softened. "Reeves and his associates are facing very long prison sentences, Noah. The evidence against them is overwhelming, and NeuroCorp itself has been disbanded, its assets seized. But there might be others," Noah persisted, "other scientists who want to do tests." Dr. Bennett couldn't deny this possibility, so she chose honesty. "That's why we've been so careful about protecting the puppy's true nature. On paper, they're simply well-trained therapy dogs. Their special abilities will remain a closely guarded secret, known only to their families, a few trusted officials, and my small research team." This seemed to satisfy Noah, who nodded thoughtfully before turning his attention back to Comet. The smallest puppy had grown considerably in the past weeks, though he remained more delicate than his siblings had been. What he lacked in size, however, he made up for in determination and intelligence. Already he could retrieve objects by name, respond to complex commands, and, most remarkably, seemed to anticipate Noah's needs before they were expressed. The household felt strangely quiet without the tumble and yip of 6 active puppies. Luna seemed subdued for several days, checking the places her puppies had favored, as if expecting to find them there. Max stayed close to her, their shoulders often touching as they moved around the yard or house. "They're grieving," Sophie observed to Dr. Bennett during one of her now weekly visits. "Even though they understand where the puppies have gone, they still miss them." The scientist nodded, making notes as she watched Luna finally engage in play with Comet after days of listlessness. "It's remarkable how complex their emotional lives are. In many ways, their enhanced empathy makes the separation harder for them than it would be for ordinary dogs. They feel the absence more deeply. Just like people," Sophie said softly. "Just like people," Dr. Bennett agreed. "The line between human and canine cognition has never been as clear as we once thought. Project Empathy simply made that more evident." As August turned to September, life settled into a new normal. Noah returned to school full-time, his teachers amazed by his transformation. The silent, withdrawn child of the previous year was now engaged, talkative, and confident. Though he still preferred the company of a few close friends to large groups, Luna's leg had healed completely, allowing her to run and play without restriction. Max had regained all his strength, his protective instincts now channeled into constructive activities, like accompanying Noah to and from the school bus stop each day. And Comet continued to develop his own unique personality, curious, determined, and utterly devoted to Noah. Dr. Bennett brought news of the other puppies during each visit, sharing photos and reports from their new families. Jackson's anxiety attacks had decreased by 70% since Apollo joined their household. Emma had begun whispering words to Willow, though she still wasn't speaking to humans. The veteran with PTSD had slept through the night for the first time in years, with his puppy Tara curled against his side. Their changing lives, Dr. Bennett told Sophie and Noah as they reviewed these updates together, just as Luna and Max changed yours. Fall arrived with crimson leaves and crisp mornings. Almost 6 months had passed since that stormy night when Noah had discovered 2 German shepherds buried alive in a ravine. Sometimes it seemed like a lifetime ago. Other times Sophie would wake with a start, heart pounding, convinced she could hear the chain rattling as they struggled to free the dogs from the mud. On the anniversary of Daniel's death, the accident that had stolen Noah's voice for so long, Sophie expected a difficult day. She woke early, steeling herself to support Noah through what had last year been a day of silent grief. To her surprise, Noah was already up, dressed, and sitting on the porch with all 3 dogs. Luna and Max flanked him as usual, while Comet perched on his lap, amber eyes alert and watchful. "I want to visit Dad today," Noah said as Sophie joined them, handing her a mug of the hot chocolate he'd apparently made himself. Sophie took a deep breath, testing her own readiness for such a visit. They had been to the cemetery only twice since Daniel's death, both times emotionally devastating experiences that had set Noah's progress back for days afterward. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" she asked carefully. Noah nodded, his expression serene rather than sad. "I want to tell him about Luna and Max and Comet, about everything that happened. I think he'd like that." Sophie blinked back sudden tears. "I think he'd like that too." They drove to the small cemetery after breakfast, the 3 dogs sitting calmly in the back seat of Sophie's car. The groundskeeper, who knew their history, nodded respectfully as they passed, but raised his eyebrows at the dogs. Sophie gave him a reassuring wave, and he didn't interfere. Daniel's grave was simple, a smooth granite marker with his name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved Husband and Father." Sophie had agonized over those words at the time, finding any epitaph inadequate to capture the vibrant, loving man she had lost. Noah approached the grave confidently, the dogs staying close beside him. He sat cross-legged on the grass, and the dogs arranged themselves around him, Luna on his right, Max on his left, and Comet in his lap, as always. "Hi, Dad," Noah began, his voice clear and strong. "I brought some friends to meet you." Sophie hung back, giving her son this moment, while remaining close enough to offer support if needed. But as Noah spoke, telling Daniel's grave about finding the dogs in the ravine, about Agent Reeves and the cabin confrontation, about Luna's puppies and how each had gone to help a special child, she realized that her support wasn't needed. Noah was sharing his story, their story, with complete confidence, his voice never wavering even when describing the hardest parts. "I didn't talk for a long time after you died," Noah said, reaching the part of the story Sophie found most painful. "It felt like all my words were stuck inside, and if I let them out, it would make it real that you were gone." Comet shifted in Noah's lap, pressing closer to him, as if sensing the emotional weight of this confession. Luna and Max remained perfectly still, their amber eyes fixed on Noah with that extraordinary focus that still sometimes took Sophie's breath away. "But then I found Luna and Max, and they were hurt worse than me, and they needed help, so I had to find my words again." Noah stroked Comet's head gently. "They saved me by needing me to save them. Isn't that funny, Dad? I think you'd laugh about that." To Sophie's amazement, Noah smiled, a real, genuine smile at the memory of his father's laugh. It was the first time she'd seen him smile while talking about Daniel since the accident. "I miss you every day," Noah continued, his smile fading, but the peace in his expression remaining. But I'm okay now. We're okay. And I wanted you to know. As they drove home afterward, Noah was quiet, but not withdrawn. There was a new steadiness to him, a solidity that seemed beyond his years. Sophie recognized it as the beginning of healing, not the absence of grief, but the integration of it into a life that continued to move forward. That night, as she tucked Noah into bed with Comet already curled at his feet, Sophie asked the question that had been on her mind all day. How did you know you were ready to visit Dad today? Noah considered this carefully, in the thoughtful way he approached everything now. Luna and Max taught me that being hurt doesn't mean you have to stay hurt forever, he said finally. They got better, their bodies got better, and then their hearts got better too. I wanted to show Dad that I'm getting better. Sophie kissed his forehead, her heart full of wonder at the wisdom in his young voice. I love you so much, Noah Morgan. I love you too, Mom, he replied, snuggling deeper under the covers. And Luna and Max and Comet. We're all family now. As Sophie turned to leave, Noah called her back. Mom, do you think the puppies can really talk to each other in their minds, like Dr. Bennett said, even though they're far away from each other now? Sophie thought about all she had witnessed over these extraordinary months. A silent child finding his voice, dying dogs brought back to life, a tiny puppy's heart restarting at the command of a 5-year-old boy. The boundaries of what she believed possible had expanded beyond recognition. Yes, she said with certainty. I think they can. Love like that doesn't stop just because you can't see each other anymore. Noah smiled, already drifting towards sleep. That's what I think too. As she closed his door, Sophie caught a final glimpse of her son, peacefully sleeping with 3 dogs arranged protectively around him, Luna and Max on the floor beside the bed, and tiny Comet curled against Noah's chest, rising and falling with each breath. They had all been broken in different ways, a widow, a silent child, abused and abandoned dogs. But together, they had found a peculiar kind of healing, a family forged in crisis and bound by something beyond ordinary understanding. Outside, the moon rose over Willow Creek, its light spilling through Noah's window and illuminating the white crescent on Comet's chest, the mark that had given him his name. In the silver glow, it seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, a small beacon in the darkness, a reminder of miracles that could not be explained but could be witnessed, experienced, and cherished. This incredible journey from silence to healing shows how the deepest connections can form in the most unexpected ways. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring content. What was your favorite moment in Noah's journey with Luna and Max? Let us know in the comments below.